Ready to call this meeting to order. We are enjoying getting together and seeing Miss Morgan back from her trip, and we're catching up on information, which is a good thing. Thank you for being here this afternoon. This is the briefing meeting for Wednesday, October 10th. The time that we are starting is 2:03. And again, Mr. Blurton's not here, but I will say it is Hump Day in his honor. And there's a good thing about Hump Day. Today we're going to be all of our chairs and or vice chairs from our advisory committees will be giving us brief reports of what's been going on. And then we will be following up with a capital project update, which is exciting. And then we will be looking at U.S. best practices did I say U.S.? District best practices regarding school security and why we've made those choices. And there is one change order memo. And then we have the instructional calendar that we will be briefed on. Is there anything for good of the order that anyone has at this time? Okay, then we will proceed. And let's begin with, we will go right in alphabetical order. And let's start with district, well, we'll go out of that order. I'm going to go with District Advisory Council. Ms. Crosby, it's good to see you.
Nice to see you. Good afternoon, members of the board, Dr. Atkins and Mr. Dodig. I have my quarterly report. I'm sure you've already looked it over. I don't want to go, bore you with it. Everything's in the meeting. So we had our usual board update. We talked our May meeting. Dr. Atkins gave us a year-end update. And Mark Mora and Soretta Ralph talked about the student assignment plan update, and we had to vote on changing the middle school parameters. And then in September, I was not present for that meeting, but I guess Mr. Dodig, which is a good thing, talked about parliamentary procedure and the role of the chair and vice chair and the Sunshine Law. Very important. A lot of the new DAC members don't know that. And I remember when I first started DAC 10 years ago, we were made to go to training, but I don't think they have that probably online. There's one, but. And then I guess there was a great presentation on volunteerism, and then they broke out in breakout groups. There is one concern I want to bring to the board. We've had presentations by a couple different committees, the site selection in April 2017 and student assignment in May 2018. At that time, they sort of asked if they could present after we had our agenda, so they sort of made it so that we had to switch everything around and couldn't have breakout groups. Also, we were not aware at the time for either of these presentations that there would be a vote after the presentation. And we discussed this at length at last executive DAC at the beginning of the month, that it really, the members are not happy, the DAC members are not happy with that. They don't feel that they have the time to review the presentation and really intelligently vote on it. It's almost like you need to vote now. When you've only heard it, you haven't had time to digest anything. So, and also with no breakout sessions, that's a problem because from what I understand, especially in the middle school group last time, they were very upset when we don't have breakout sessions because the way they see DAC is the way they should see DAC. They're bringing information from their SAC. If we don't have the breakout session, there's no time to do that. I mean, I know you can write it on a piece of paper, but sometimes it's better just to get your point across verbally. So we talked about in our last executive DAC that we were going to ask that should a committee ask to be added to our agenda, we have, executive DAC is made aware of the topic of the presentation and if a vote will be taken. And should a vote need to be taken at that time, we are asking for the presentation material at least 10 days in advance so we can get it out to the DAC members and they can be a little more informed and not feel so blindsided.
That's very valid. I understand that concern because we had that when I was the liaison for DAC.
Yeah, well,
And so
yeah.
I see that, and if there's something that they, maybe it may think about backing up when the presentation is done, so they could vote on it at the following meeting.
Right, yeah, that would be great.
Conversation about, and so, Ms. Fisher,
Yes,
yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are.
yes. Well, we discussed it at the last executive DAC meeting, and it was decided that it would be brought forward, and then we would look for a way to establish a process that would give us an opportunity to review the information one time, and then be able to have time in between to do research and talk to others, and then make the vote at the next meeting.
Dr. Atkins?
And I wasn't aware of this concern from District Advisory Committee until Andy Erickson raised it to me at a Rotary meeting of all places. But I did speak to Dr. Carlin and indicated to her I didn't, I agreed with their concerns. I don't think it's good practice for us to bring something to DAC and then expect them to have a vote. So this is something that she's worked on. She's got I know, an email out to our cabinet members who would be the folks that might be bringing something potentially for a vote to DAC, so that they have the information well in advance and they're not on the spot and expecting to come there and instantaneously walk away from the vote with a vote the same evening. So I appreciate the concerns being brought forward, and apologize for the committee being put in that position, and we're going to take steps to rectify that situation moving forward. I understand Dr. Carlin's going to work with Executive DAC so that we can get a process in place that we all can agree to.
Great.
That sounds great. Okay,
Okay, can I say one more thing?
Yes.
Thank you for the time and the help that you've given me while I've served on this board. I'm stepping down from DAC and from chairperson. I've been on DAC for 10 years. I've been on a school SAC since my 24-year-old was a kindergartner. And and I've been chairperson of DAC for 3 years. So I'm stepping down. So next time you'll see new blood up here. I want to thank everybody for all your support.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Right, next we will hear from Construction Advisory Committee. Ryan Richards. How are you today?
Wonderful. How are you?
Well, I think we're great.
Good afternoon, members of the board and members of the public. Ryan Richards, returning this year as chair yet again for the Construction Advisory Committee. This was our first summer at trying to meet through the summer. We were trying to pick up a few meeting dates. We took July off, and August we had a scheduling miscue that June, we had a scheduling miscue. July, we had off. August, we took the opportunity of that extra meeting to go meet at Bonita Springs High School and take a tour of that facility. So we had our regularly scheduled meeting in their media center. They're still putting furniture in at that point in time. Wasn't quite up and running, but we got to see all the good things going on in that facility and some of the technical aspects of the programs that they're putting in there are really well done. During our typical meeting beforehand, we did get some updates on the progress of Triple M Hype School going out in the Gateway area and how that site plan is working, and a little bit of input on arrangement of layout of fields and those facilities. One of the items brought up to our agenda this year was also to take a look at some of the custody reports that had been done or are in progress for Franklin Park and Cypress Lake Middle School. So we distributed that information for the board members to start absorbing so that we could start talking about them in the next few months at that point. And we had our August meeting, and then September started with our elections. We had a bit of turnover, some good new faces in there to see. And we proceeded with an update on the sales tax initiative, and a motion was made to confirm our support of the initiative, and as we had in previous years, and that once again, passed unanimously. So we're behind you guys in any way you need in that regard. We've had discussions for years and years and understand how we are, where we are, and well, what has to be done at this point. So, and then we went into the again, the Castaldi reports and how those functionalities are worked out and reported to the state. And at Mr. Toiber's suggestion, we have moved our next meeting to Cypress Lake Middle School to take a tour of that facility. You know, looking at a report and a few pictures is one thing, but, you know, to really understand how it works. So, you know, our next meeting will be relocated, and we look to, you know, picking up the challenge of anything you might task us with for the upcoming year.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, are there any suggestions, or Mr. Toiber?
Well, we had quite a in-depth discussion as far as what's going on currently with our schools that are needing of either renovation or to be raised, and you saw the reports that were submitted, and to talk a little bit about that. Two things, you know, one, and I would take it to go to the order as far as the process of how those questions got asked, but it was good that those questions got brought forward as far as what do we need to do as a board to really wrap our heads around the process, because it's not just that we decide based upon our recommendations from our CAC and from our staff, but also once we decide, okay, this is where we want to go, we have to fight the state to let them say we can do it. In other words, it's been the practice of the state to deny these requests to raise these buildings and actually make you kind of put lipstick on a pig and continue to develop it rather than tear it down. And so I think it's prudent for us as a board to really engage the CAC and Mr. Rickenbacker and Mr. Moore's team to really get our heads wrapped around that a lot more, because our situation with some of our schools, you know, if we get told no at Franklin Park or whatever, we're in trouble, because those schools, the foundation, we've already been doing the lipstick on a pig thing for so long that our foundation and structure really doesn't facilitate to be able to do that. So we not only have to we have to make sure that it sells. And then the question becomes, is pragmatically, is, you know, when you tear down a school, you're allowed to put back that same size school. Well, that may not, you know, based upon, you know, our demographic needs and our geographics and the ability that we have as far as how hard it is to get land, you know, do we try to break the mold and say, look, we have the ability to add this many more seats in an area where we know we have seats, and what is it going to take us for it to whether we have to use our legislatures, you know, delegation, or what we have to do to be able to actively go forward to get what we need for our community, and not based upon, well, this is how we do it and these are the, you know, the steps. And as Mr. Rickenbacker told our group, you know, it first was just when the process first came through, it was just a bunch of educators, and then it became the educators and construction-based people that understand the construction issues, and it was just a pretty simple answer of construction says, yeah, it's time to tear it down and rebuild it. Well, now they've got lawyers and they've got, you know, all the other departments, and Mark can actually tell you, Mr. Moore can tell you more about all the people they've added, but now it's a whole team with people that have a bunch of different perspectives and different viewpoints that now may or may not be looking at it in the lens that facilitates education and facilitates what we need in Lee County. So I think it's a very important issue, and I think CAC would be a great place for us to have that developed. And then if they need to pull in the CSI or another committee because it becomes a legislative issue, or it becomes we need other help, you know, whether it's the round table from Dr. Atkins. But this is going to be a big deal, because the decisions that we're forced into doing, because the way the state in their infinite wisdom has set up structures that may or may not see our particular way. You know, we're growing, nobody else is. The length, size of our, you know, the years of our buildings that nobody else has, the demographics we face, the land challenges we face. We're unique in a lot of different ways that we're going to have to break a mold. And so,
To edify me again, and for those who are viewing who might not have heard that, so currently we are bound to build a school on that site that will have the same classroom seats as had been there previously, correct?
Well, right now, we've got to get permission for us to be able to do that at all. Right now, the decision hasn't been made to allow us to either do renovations to the existing structure or raise it completely and put in, and then if it was to be to rebuild it, then it would be planned, then the allowance would be build what you have with the same amount of seats. So the option isn't even, that's the two options, and you can step in anytime, Mr. Rickenbacker, fill me in if I'm not getting it correctly, but that's the option. We have to fight the battle just to say, okay, you don't have to renovate, you can rebuild, and now we're saying, we want to go to Plan C. Not only do we want to rebuild, but the landscape allows us to build more seats. We can show that we need the seats, and we can show that it's economically efficient and better for our community to do that. And whether it be just for the seats or for in that community to do a center, to do a recreation center, whatever as far as a community center, all those different type of options are something that we wouldn't even get into the door in the current structure. So that's the issues that I see us coming forward to that we need to be ahead of before we submit that application.
Ms. Fisher?
So then are you saying that with the fish capacity is set for that particular site? And does that not change with a change in population, or?
It's really not, and again, correct me, Mr. Rickenbacker, if I'm wrong, but it's really not, or maybe you can actually explain too, but I don't believe it has to do with the fish report. It has to do with the process of allowing whether it's to raise or rebuild on a given site. And it really doesn't take into play our fish capacity or fish capacity for a particular designated site.
So then where does that permission come from, essentially?
From
the state,
a part of the Department of Education and their building zone improvement.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Moore?
Thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon, Board. Real quickly, when we add seats or remove seats from our district inventory, we need to seek permission from the DOE. And we do that in the form of a survey. So every 5 years, we create a survey that demonstrates, based on projections that the state provides us, our need for seats. So we build that into our 5-year survey and our work plan. If we want to change what's in the work plan, and we just recently approved it last year, so we're still in year 2, I believe, we would have to do something called a spot survey and seek their permission to build additional seats in that area. But we would have to actually express a need for those seats in that zone. So if you look at South 1, where Franklin Park is located right now, in our current survey, there is not an express need for additional seats. So Mr. Torber is correct. We would have to seek an amendment to our survey through a spot survey. And you have to replace them with, if we were just to raise it and not seek the survey, we would have to just replace it with the amount of seats we have now.
Right.
And anything in addition to that, if you want to do something with the community center, and it would be probably my opinion that they wouldn't even allow us to rebuild the gymnasium that's currently there on that site. It does not carry any capacity, and it's something that the community uses. So that's something that we'd have to be creative with asking the state for approval on.
Can you also briefly explain the complexity of the decision-making process of whether they would allow us to even raise the building or just do renovations?
Yeah, and Mr. Torber is right alluding to that process. One of the steps is that Castaldi analysis that was performed that showed that a majority of the buildings on those campuses are beyond their economical life. It would be much more economical for the school district just to raise the building and build new. However, there are several steps we have to take. The Castaldi is just one. We have to show again that our enrollment is actually, our projected enrollment is showing a need for those seats, even if we're rebuilding. We also have to keep in consideration what our utility costs are at those buildings. Are we going to improve efficiency by rebuilding? So they've asked us to provide utility bills that prove that these things are not, these buildings and facilities that we're planning to raise are not economical. There's also a community aspect to it as well. So it's a pretty comprehensive approach. Mr. Torber's right. In the past, it was a lot easier. We did this at Dunbar High School and at Tice Elementary. We got those approvals pretty quickly to tear them down and rebuild them. But the process has changed, and they're requiring us to go through a whole lot more steps to get the approval.
So one of the things is anybody else? I have been saying for a couple of years in my conversations with Dr. Atkins that we need to have a field trip where we take members of, take our local legislative delegation with us and our county commissioners or county commissioner staff to go with us to look at what the needs are. Because when I speak with people, they don't see that. And I believe that there's a great deal of value in taking people out for a ride. But we'll see if we can plan it, and we'll see if they come.
I really, just to respond to that, in my humble opinion, I think we should determine whether or not there's any interest on their part before we
Okay.
plan something. I've not seen that interest to this point.
We'll see if we can
Candidly.
get some interest. I understand. I appreciate that.
Just if I can add. But Dr. Atkins, you have to admit, when we did get Senator Benaquisto out to our tech center, I mean, the miles we got was amazing, and her whole change, and so I think that I do think it's worth pursuing to see if we can do some type of enticement, the same type of thing, if we can, win and get some award, we get Senator Rubio there, something that actually gets us, Senator Rooney is a huge fan of ours, and
Representative Rooney.
once you get him, typically our local delegation seems to follow suit when we get, and so we might have better chance to, work in that route.
Draw on
I
the
mean, I
others.
think the way you pursue that is working with them first to see if there's
Oh,
an
yes.
interest, rather than setting it up and then expecting them
Oh,
to
I
be
agree.
there.
Yeah.
Because I would hope that they would be. And once you get somebody in a school, then the story tells itself.
Thank you.
Next, we have Dr. Michelle Stork, and she will be presenting to us on CSI, Continuous Systemic Improvement. Dr. Stork is a new addition that came on last year, and she's a very positive asset to that committee. So thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon, members of the board, Dr. Atkins and Mr. Dodig. The CSI Advisory Committee has met twice since our last report. May 21st, 2018 was the last meeting of fiscal year 2018, and that meeting was devoted to reviewing the topics that the committee addressed over the last year and agreeing on recommendations that we would make to the board. So the committee approved the following recommendations. The first one is with regard to principal evaluations. I know that you can all see the report, so I don't know that you want me to go in detail about those recommendations, but the advisory committee was concerned that the role of the principal in the success of the school be given weight in the evaluation process. So there are certain factors such as teacher retention and the implementation of specific district expectations that should be included in the evaluation process. And there's some specific recommendations in the report. I'd be happy to read them, but I know that you all have them probably in front of you. So I'll move on unless you'd like me to read those. The second recommendation was advisory committee training. We recommended that all Board Advisory Committee chairpersons and vice chairpersons be provided with training within 1 month of being elected. I will make a side note here that Mr. Dodig did do that at our second meeting held on September 17th. The Advisory Committee also gives its formal support to the sales tax initiative and recommends that a Lean Six Sigma project be developed around the guest teacher process. The first meeting of fiscal year 2019 was held, as I mentioned, on September 17th, and in addition to Mr. Dodig providing parliamentary procedure training to the committee and reviewing guidelines for committee members, our board liaison, who is Mrs. LaRiere, provided an update on the sales tax referendum initiative, and our staff liaison, Ms. McClung, provided an update on Vision 2020 results, as well as an update on the status of recommendations to the board. The status of the principal evaluation recommendation and guest teacher process have been forwarded to Dr. Pruitt. Election of committee officers was held, with myself being elected as chairperson and Mr. Brian Rasnick elected vice chairperson. Future meeting dates for our committee have been agreed upon and posted to the district website, and our committee discussed topics for future meetings. So at our next meeting, which will be held on October 15th, we will be getting an overview of Envision 2030, which is the district's new strategic plan, and that will be the topic of our next meeting.
Board members?
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Next, we have the pleasure of Advisory Committee with Ms. April Catron.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is April Catron, and I'm representing the chair position role for the Curriculum Advisory Committee. We have met in every month since the last time that we met with you. In May was our first meeting with Kathleen Morgan speaking to us about the kindergartners and Vision 2020 moving forward into 2030. With that, she spoke about how Dr. Creel and other members of the cabinet have a plan that has been revised and is actually being formatted and updated every quarter with our district, and it's K-12 with the progression. In 2030, we have a plan of how we're going to meet the needs of all of our students, and that starts now. Dr. Itzen also reviewed our goals and the strategic plan from Vision 2020. This was back in May, and the state of accountability system with school grading and the district grade. In June, we decided that we were going to try something new and meet over the summer each month because we felt that it was important that we support the curriculum process throughout the summer. Mr. Teuber was our board member for that month and opened the meeting with topic House Bill of 769 and how it had been denied, and that how we were going to continue with the appeal process. Next, we had curriculum maps and instructional guides that were presented by Dr. Creel, and she gave us the what and the how and the insight to what we needed in our K-12 comprehensive system. The first 9 weeks had been presented to teachers before they even left for the summer so that they could plan accordingly. We also have multiple sources of data to look at so that we can triangulate and best meet the needs of our students in the district. And as a parent and a teacher in the district, I find that this has been very helpful. The teachers are a lot more responsive, and the overall sense in the district is that we are moving forward in a positive direction, and it's showing with our school grading. Then in July, we had the board member report with Kathleen Morgan, and she had presented data with Dr. Atkins and how 52% of our traditional schools earned an A or a B, not including the district charter schools, and that we maintained the B for the 5th year in a row. As a student and a product of the Lee County School District, I find this to be a wonderful milestone for us that we've made that turnaround, and as a product, I am proud to support my schools and the teachers and staff and faculty and all of the students in the district to see how far we've come in so many years. Dr. Atkins also said that we've taken the 23 schools in DA status and that we were down to 1. And again, this was back in July. A lot has happened since then. And that when you look at the top 10 school district size-wise, you see that we've made incredible changes over the last couple of years. We had a presentation at that time by Dr. Itzen on school grade summaries for the year 2018, school year 27-18. And then in August, we had our board member report with Kathleen Morgan and the tax initiative. We also discussed how voting was going to be very important this year because, unfortunately, we have 4 of our 7 board member seats that will be available that we will be voting on. And we've had wonderful representation, and we look forward to the next school year. One of our initiatives that we are putting in place as the Curriculum Advisory Committee this year is that we're having action steps. And one of our first action steps coming forward with the board and the district is math textbook adoption. So we will have representation at every level, elementary, middle, and high school, for our math textbook adoption, and we will be reporting that out to you. Also, all of our meetings have been posted on the website, and we look forward to any information or suggestions that you have for us to discuss as a Curriculum Advisory Committee.
Okay. Board members, Ms. Morgan.
Go ahead, Chris. I just have a question. When I'm out in the public talking about our schools, typically I get applause over the 23-to-1 DA schools. Is there a way that we can do one of those heartfelt videos that makes me get a lump in my throat, showing the progress at those schools, how those achievements were accomplished, and a comparison to the other mega districts across the state and the numbers they have? I think that's something the public should really know more about.
We can do that. I'll work with Lauren on something like that. I think if you look at how we compare to the top 10 school districts in our progress with DA status, we're I think the only district that really only has one D school. The rest of them have more than one D, and some of them have Fs, obviously. And those are pretty good, most of them are pretty good school districts. I mean, we're talking about, we're comparing its good districts.
Yeah, I mean, Hillsborough is one of our lakes districts, and compare us to them, and it's...
And Hillsborough, in terms of DA status, is one of the worst in the state. But, we're also comparing with, like Miami-Dade, who's one of the better districts, Broward, Palm Beach. And so we compare very favorably to them in terms of only having that one school. And, I think I've said this to most of you, but a recent visit out to that school, I mean, there's some phenomenal things that are going on at that school. Just the energy and the climate, it makes it makes you feel, this school has really turned itself around. The kids demonstrate a lot of pride. The staff demonstrate a lot of pride in what's going on. There is a video that was put out by Lauren and her team relative to that school that if you haven't had an opportunity to view it, I would, definitely say check it out. And if you get a chance to visit the school, I'd recommend that as well. You'll see a huge positive difference. So,
it's exciting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Morgan.
Now, one thing that the committee has struggled with, and I think they've done a good job, is trying to figure out how to structure their work in such a way that it's meaningful for them and puts them in a position of providing some critical feedback to the board, as well as trying to figure out what exactly it is that the board wants from them. And I think what it really boils down to is they get a lot of data, but they don't know, and I'm not talking about curriculum, I'm talking about many of the committees.
Right.
I think they get a lot of data, but they don't know how to prioritize because it's not clear what the issues are. I guess what I'm trying to say is I'd like to see more alignment between the strategic plan, now that we have it so well defined, and the work of the advisory committees, because
What we expect from them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because the plan identifies the critical areas where we need to grow and change, and helping the respective committees, zoom in on that, I think would be helpful. But anyway, they've had some really good conversations, and I think they've made some. They're going to have a great year, and I'm glad to see April running the show again. So congratulations.
Well, I'm still here. However, because of turnout at the last meeting, we are still voting on our chair and vice chair.
Okay.
But thank you.
Thanks, April.
Thank you so much. Dr. Manea. Oh,
No?
we have someone representing. Are you the vice chair?
I am the vice chair.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you for being here.
My name is Dennis Quisenberry III. I am the new vice chair for the EDAC committee. Good afternoon, board, Dr. Atkins, Mr. Dodig. I have a short report to give you. I'm reading a prepared statement from Dr. Manaya. Some of our key messages from last year. Social worker presentation resulted in EDAC asking about the best practice in this area. It appeared we were understaffed at this role. Best practice is 1 social worker per 400 students. At the time of presentation, we had 37 social workers serving the district. Since our recommendation, we were glad to hear that the district was hiring more social workers. The committee also made a recommendation over a year ago to create the Office of the Director of Diversity and Inclusion, reporting directly to the superintendent. The committee is most appreciative of the board and the district funding the new Director of Diversity and Inclusion. We are delighted to work closely with Mr. Eady and his office. The committee felt it was time to refresh and reframe our vision for EDAC. We invited diverse community leaders to help us set a context for how EDAC could be a more valuable resource. The committee also invited Yemisi Coates from Lee Health to shed light on creating a new diversity vision. Under her leadership, Lee Health has won national awards in the area of diversity. And on our meeting on October 8th, we aligned a new vision for the EDAC committee. I have printed copies of the new vision for each of you. Thank you. And I'm happy to report that our new EDAC vision is a community where individuals feel safe, cared for, and connected as one, all having access to equity, feeling included to cultivate diversity and inclusiveness. And that's all from us.
Nice. Board members. Mr. Toiber?
I would just like to say also to Mr. Quisenberry's comment about Lee Health, they just won last week at the Horizon Awards the diversity award for their programs with Accepting Diversity. So I think that our continued partnership with them and to steal shamelessly from them is continuing to give benefits to our district. So.
And I just want to say one of the components that I really felt EDAC needed to encompass, and your vision takes care of that, is including, is the aspect of inclusiveness does not necessarily mean diversity of race or cultural backgrounds. It also includes our diversity of our children who are not typical. And I just really appreciate that because we really do need to focus on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I had the opportunity to visit their last meeting and give a brief presentation, but you can certainly feel the desire on the part of the committee to really roll their sleeves up and go to work this year. I'm looking forward to working with the committee and Mr. Eady, who I think is really going to take us to a whole new level. So I'm glad to see that the committee has reached out to Lee Health because, as you had indicated, they have really, I think, done a good job in this particular area. I've seen her presentations as well and what they've been able to accomplish, and I think we can learn from them. So I'm really glad that you are doing that work and looking forward to this year.
All right. Thank you very much.
And Mr. Quisenberry, thank you so much for sharing your wife with us.
I do what I can.
Mr. Paul Cohen, Finance Advisory Committee. How are you doing this afternoon?
Good, and yourself?
We're well. It's good to see you again.
Same here. Good afternoon, everyone. During the course of the summer, we met each month, as we are prone to do. Very briefly, we spent quite a bit of time going over the operational and capital requirements under the school safety requirements from the state mandate. Met with Mr. Parfit, Mrs. Petricka. It kept us apprised of what was occurring. And we also met with Mr. Blurton as well to get a better understanding. And that started in May when the mandate first came down. And during the course of the summer, we were meeting continually to get a better understanding of what the financial impact will be to the district in complying with those mandates. We also decided to follow up on prior recommendations, including a meeting with Tebow Partnership to get a better understanding as to how the naming rights is proceeding, how the revenue stream is being brought into the district, what their expenses are as well, and what their future goals are for ensuring additional revenues to come into the district. The other item that we covered was the Gibson Efficiency Study. We spent considerable time going through that report. That occurred in August, and what we've opted to do is in the coming months to delve deeper with the new committee members and get a thorough understanding and make a recommendation at some point to the board as to additional testing that we would recommend that be pursued to obviously gain additional efficiencies, which would therefore result in expense reductions, and hopefully there might be some income that we might not have been able to pursue in the past. Finally, I was renamed as chairperson of the committee, and Daryl, excuse me, I apologize.
Teeblum? Is it
Thank you. Daryl Teeblum was named as vice chair for the committee, and Mr. Dodig advised us on our duties and responsibilities as board members, as committee members, I should say.
Okay.
And again, we're putting forth the same request to the board as we always do. I'm very pleased that we have 6 new members on the advisory committee, all bring exceptional financial experience, and I think that we will get up to speed very quickly with those 6 individuals, and I'm hoping that we can bring forth quite a number of strong recommendations for the coming year.
Thank you. Board members, any comments or questions? Yes. Ms. Giovanelli.
We talked about having a workshop with the Gibson, or I think Dr. Atkins did recently. Can we wait till either after their recommendation or something? You know what I mean? Like they need to coincide there a little bit somehow. I don't want to workshop it until we hear from, till they finish theirs. You know what I'm saying?
No, I hear. Doc, we just need to hear what other board members think and what Dr. Atkins thinks.
Me, or go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I believe we are working to coordinate that effort. Mr. Blurton has reached out to Gibson Consulting and relative to the board workshop that we had in terms of finding out, cost of the different configurations of potential audits. That's information that we want to share with our financial advisory committee, and then we would bring forward a recommendation that I think would be vetted through that committee as well. So,
makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All righty. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Anything else?
I just want you guys to know I'm not comfortable voting on this until a recommendation comes out of FAC.
Oh, I agree.
Comes out of Finance Advisory.
Well, I really, again, that's what I
Yeah.
That's what I think
That's
we're
what
doing.
he's saying.
We're all on the same page.
Oh, yes, I think so. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Cohen.
Okay, thank you.
Next on the agenda is our capital project update. Mr. Moore, Mr. Rickenbacker, it's a pleasure to see you at the table.
Pleasure to see the board members here this afternoon. Before we start, I would like to design partners and construction partners here in the audience today. They make a good portion of the crowd today. Just a testament to our partnership. We have in the audience today Suffolk Construction, which is working on the Lehigh Senior High School, the MMM High School project. We also have Christelle here as well, that's working on our Lehigh Senior High School project. And we have the architects from BSSW here, as well as the engineer, Johnson Engineering, on the high school MMM project. And we have RG Architects in the audience today as well. So they're all here showing support of our presentation this afternoon. Before we jump into the presentation, I just want to be a bit preemptive, have some preemptive points. Really, the salient point is that no two projects are alike, even when using a prototype design. So I think the immediate thought is, let's compare Bonita Springs High School with what we're building in Gateway. And I just want to make some points that they differ in the approach as well as the scope. So the first thing I want to point out is that high school MMM is currently being designed to hold 2,000 student stations. That's 300 more stations than Bonita Springs High School has right at this moment. High school MMM's Building A, that's the main academic building where a majority of the classrooms are located, will have 42,638 more square feet than Bonita Springs High School. That's because of the addition of a third floor to accommodate those 300 extra students. I also want to point out some costs to you. When we went back and looked at analysis of the construction costs for Building A at Bonita Springs High School, per square foot it was about $180. So if you think back about the additional square footage we're putting into MMM to accommodate the 300 students, that accounts to about $7.6 to $7.7 million. So again, we're not building the same building in Gateway that we built on Imperial Parkway. We also would be remiss if we didn't mention, and we have mentioned that this at almost all of our briefings, is that our market is seeing quite a bit of inflation in construction. Between 10 and 12% is what we're hearing from our partners, even higher. And it has been some time since we broke ground at Bonita and when we'll break ground at MMM. So please keep that in mind as well. And the approach, I mentioned that there's some differences in approach. We took a value engineering approach at Bonita Springs High School where we eliminated things in retrospect without having a life cycle cost analysis done, things such as the HVAC program or system. So our approach here is looking at long-term savings. So the upfront investment, for example, in a magnetic bearing chiller system might be a little bit more expensive than what we did at Bonita Springs High School, but if you look over the 50 years that that school will be in service, it is a cost savings to the district. So I just want to mention those things before we jump into the presentation so that we don't jump to conclusions and do those apples to oranges comparisons on these two projects.
Did you know about the conversation that I had with a community member earlier today where they asked every single one of those questions?
I did not.
We did not coordinate this, but it's amazing that somehow you must know that that's the conversation that's taking place out there.
We try to keep our ear to the rail, and you know, with our design partners, they have that same ear to the ground. So we're addressing those things, whereas we might not have done that in the former process. So as we jump into this update, I want to remind you that on this particular project, High School MMM, we're at 30% document development. That means we're really on the early stages of looking at the design and construction. And we obligated ourselves in this new approach. If you remember, this is a pre-construction phase. We do not have a total project cost right now. We're building towards one. And one way you build towards a total project cost is you work on the construction costs first with a synergistic team, and that team includes Scott, myself, Steve Hanna, as well as the design partners that are here in the audience today. So 30% design development documentation. I'm going to let Scott take it over from here.
Good afternoon, board members. Good afternoon, board members. Dr. Atkins, Mr. Dodig. Currently, we've had weekly meetings for the East Zone High School MMM. It's a 55-acre site. The architect has provided a schematic design estimate, and in your packet there you can see it was about $75 million. Concurrently with them, our construction manager, Suffolk Construction, has also provided an independent estimate. And through the meetings, we gauged the two estimates, and we continually work closer and closer. And they've come in at 30% drawings with almost $78 million. Those fees are fairly close. We have some items that we're working through, financial items, part of VE process, and that'll get tighter and tighter, and those numbers should come closer and closer as we have as Lehigh as well, and I'll speak to that in a moment. Some things I want you to be aware of. Obviously, this entire 55-acre site, we are going to be mitigating all of the wetland impacts on that site, and right now the current estimate, because we have to go for the Panther mitigation zone on there, is between $700,000 to $1 million. Obviously, we're hoping for the lower figure. We should know in the next month or so when the Corps validates our mitigation credits, exactly which side of that spectrum we're at. We're hoping for the 700. We've met with LEDOT just last week. Obviously, you're aware of the SR 82 changes that have occurred and the changes that have occurred up at the Griffin Road intersection. We're moving towards a roundabout. The proximity of adding, we can't have cut-in lanes because the proximity with the signal on 82 and Griffin Road, as well as the adjacent property across the street, wouldn't allow us to have the length of the turn-in lanes for stacking to turn into the school. And to add a light, like we did at Bonita, the proximity to the light that's installed at 82 and Griffin is also too close together. So it looks like we're going to have our first roundabout entry into the school. We will have a separate bus entry further on down along Griffith Road to get in. So we're working through with that division at LEDOT on that. Another potential change that we have is we are moving forward with discussions with EOC, Lee County EOC, to make this a shelter. We've come up with a base shelter program and a rough cost estimate at this moment in time of about $750,000. That would be what we call the Building B, which is a gymnasium cafeteria only. That includes things of upgrading the generator, providing some fresh air, makeup and exhaust, no air conditioning. But we recently found out that as of January 1st of 2018, there has been some changes to the codes required for shelter building. We are going to be required to bring the shelter, we designed to 180 per Florida Building Code, but with the new ICC 500 codes that came out in January that we have to adhere to, we're going to have to go up to a 200 mile per hour rating on this building. There is going to be additional costs. I'm not prepared at this time to say how much more over and above the $750,000 that will be. But all of these costs to bring this up to a shelter at some point in time will be borne and paid for by Lee EOC.
Before we leave this slide, I do want to mention that the two estimates, why we do two estimates is intentional. And as we develop the documents, the design documents further, the objective is for those two numbers to come closer together, to come to agreement as we value engineer and we do some more look at the design and what we're looking to do at that site. So the next briefing we'll have on this, you'll see a lot more agreement between those two numbers as all of the partners start to work together. But again, we're at 30% here.
And just to go back, in the past, when you think about the Bonita project, the original estimate, this didn't come from CM and architect. You know, it was originally came from really facility staff that came up with that estimate that resulted in the figure being brought before the board. This is very different in terms of the process.
Just to piggyback on that, Dr. Atkins, what we're doing right now in the past would have come after you approved the total project cost. So we had the cart before the proverbial horse, so much different approach. If you'll indulge me, we do have a fly-through of the proposed campus put together by the architect. One of the things we want to accomplish with this school is to make it, distinguish it from Bonita Springs High School so that it has a different feel and look. They are two individual schools for different communities. They serve our students, but we thought that this school should have a unique look. So at this point, this is what you're looking at for a site design as well as some architectural design that we've thus far done on the buildings.
And Mark, if you could share with them, I think conceptually where the architectural influences came from, that might help.
Well, we have the architect right here in the audience, and I did have that discussion with them, but really trying to incorporate with some of the other designs we're seeing here in Southwest Florida. Fort Myers, I think, is growing architecturally. We have good examples of some modern type of architecture there at the Gartner headquarters, Hertz headquarters. So just trying to replicate some of the more up-and-coming modern styles that we see here around Southwest Florida. So it's more akin to what you might see in some of the larger metropolitan areas. And with also some of the newer high schools you can see up and down the peninsula. I recently visited Venice High School because of a volleyball tournament, and much more modern look we're seeing. You know, in addition to just the architectural aspects of this, a lot more thought was put into septet design because of the Parkland incident. So just a lot of thought and learning made from the Bonita Springs High School and improvements to the design. So that's where we are right now, and I'm certain that as we progress in the design, we'll get some updates on the architecture. So to continue on, we'll...
Before you move on, I have a question on that one.
Sure.
So we have to pay for the cost of the rotary? I know you don't call them that here. What do you call them? Roundabout. Roundabout, thank you. We have to pay for that?
Yes, we do.
School district. So I think I learned that with Bonita Springs, right? We did some kind of a land swap in order to pay for the traffic light outside Bonita Springs. Is that a statutory requirement for us to pay for road upgrades, or is that a county code issue?
It's a requirement for us to create the infrastructure to access the property to get into it. That's correct.
Okay, so when communities are built, like I live in Stony Brook, when Stony Brook was built, did the builders there have to pay for the
the traffic light
change to the roads that were necessary in order for people to pull into those neighborhoods?
It would be part of their permitting process, and there could be many negotiations that are made between those entities, but typically you are responsible to create the entry point into your school.
Okay. That's very common. Do you have a CDD?
I do.
That's paid for that.
The CDD paid for the roads inside. They didn't pay for the roads outside. We're paying for changes outside. The thing that strikes me as odd is that if an accident occurs on that road because we don't put a roundabout there, we're not responsible for that. We're not liable for that. The county would be liable for that, right?
Well, how it works
I don't know
is
why we pay for it.
we build it and then we turn it back over to them. We give them the contributory assets and they now maintain that circle. So we're obligated to meet with LEDOT and to provide them with the traffic impact studies and provide them with the requirements that they need that meet those impact studies for that surface roadway which they own. And once we're done with the circle, that actually becomes theirs to maintain in the future. We no longer have an obligation for it.
With that said, I was in a meeting with Scott as well as our design partners with Lee County DOT, and Scott did frankly ask them, you guys are going to help us pay for this, right? And we did get a chuckle. So our staff is pushing them, as we did down in Bonita Springs as well. So any assistance our board might want to offer in pushing our partners over in the counties and the municipality office, that would be wonderful.
We'll see what we can do. Thank you.
Yeah, you probably noticed I didn't mention any design partners on the East Zone Middle School project. That's because we don't have any right at this moment. We're at the very preliminary stages right now of planning the East Zone Middle School. So I'll turn it over to Scott.
We do have one partner. Exceptional Engineering has jumped on board initially to help us with the development and get the permitting process moving with Water Management and MACOR. So Jason White, shout out to you. We've developed this site. We are Southwest Florida Water Management Permit. We have gone through the site and avoided all wetland impacts. So the graphic that you see is designed for a dual site, middle and elementary school site. We currently only have a spot survey for a middle school. However, we're going to go out and we're going to develop the entire acreage so that all of our water management is there. And basically, at some point in time when a spot survey, which could be as soon as next July, I believe, could be accomplished, giving us the purpose to move forward, then that builder would go out for an RFQ and we'd start an elementary school on that site as well. The interesting part is we have to develop a private roadway into the school. The property does not have a surface roadway in front of it. There are long-term plans for a connection and a culvert going over an existing ditch system. So we're working, and our first meeting is coming up again with LEDOT to talk about a partnership, possibly turning what we build over to them, similar to what we did at the D. Navarro Parkway extension when we did Island Coast High School years ago. We shared those expenses with them. We built it to their design. So that meeting, I believe, is going to happen next week. We have pushed, you'll see that we said we are going to begin the RFQ process in October this month. As a group at the Capitol meeting, we decided that we're going to push that till January. We've created a timeline, and rather than open that up at this point, we're going to shift it to January before we advertise for this middle school project.
Before you move on, I do appreciate the fact that you're going to go ahead and take care of the infrastructure all at once.
Correct.
At that site. That's more economical and it's very practical. So thank you.
And I have a question. I guess I don't understand what it means to make sure we're not having any impact on wetlands. We talked, or you said something in a meeting recently where perhaps we could build facilities so that we can share stadiums, gymnasiums, that kind of stuff at some point in the future. This is an elementary and a middle school on the same property we're looking at, right? So why wouldn't we look at building like a common administration building, a common gymnasium, or other common things as a way of finding efficiencies in the construction?
Like the cafeteria, like they have a...
Have we looked at that? Is that something we can look at?
These are larger for capacity than what we currently have for the schools. I'm just giving my opinion, excuse me. But when you go to Veterans Park, you've got shared facilities. You've got shared administration building. You've got, well, actually not shared, they're actually two. They made two kitchens, one, but we're looking at a higher capacity of students at the school, so they're going to build for larger.
No, I understand. I'm not talking about a K-8 school.
Right.
I'm talking about a middle school and an elementary school that shares facilities.
Like Patriot does and or Calusa.
Is that not
Patriot doesn't
conceptually
share
possible?
facilities.
Calusa, I got it.
Sure it is.
Calusa.
Calusa does.
Calusa Elementary and Calusa Middle share a kitchen, and that's about it on that campus. Now, in this particular design right here, or this proposal, they are sharing part of the facility. We're using one bus ramp, and we're also using one central energy plant. So there are some sharing of systems in these buildings, but as far as the structures themselves, they are separate. They are our prototypes. So if we wanted to approach where we do some sharing of interior space, we probably have to approach it with a new design to develop that. But these are our prototypes, elementary and middle, on this site, leveraging the site and sharing some parts of the systems.
Power plant will be similar to Diplomat.
Correct.
Right, yeah.
And we're also sharing a lot of the basketball courts and the sports fields have a common purpose. And then, of course, it depends on what the bell times would be for the two adjacent schools.
Has Lee Parks and Recreation reached out for any, and I don't know if there's capacity, if there's capability here or not, for any shared facilities for their purposes as well? Have they asked about that or no?
I'm not aware that they've asked, but that's certainly something we can do. We can engage with them. We have an interlocal agreement with them already. I'm sure they'll have an interest in adding this to the interlocal, but we'll take that step and reach out to them, see if there's any interest.
That area needs to diversify the range of places where people can go. So.
And the last update for today is the Lehigh Senior High School Addition and Renovation Program.
And per the slide, you can see that we've come up with a 30% design estimate, which I believe we already spoke to you at the previous briefing. It was $10,973,000. We've had our 50% drawings get estimated, and we actually have decreased the original estimate by a whopping $20,000, but I'll take everything I can get. We have a very, very tight timeline, and I'll skip to the end of it. I basically need the board and the superintendent to execute contracts by December 15th of 2018. And the reason for that is that the construction has to begin January 9th of 2019, and it's going to be a tight schedule to open the school up for the start of school of August of 19. So we may have to come good cause to you, which we're going to try not to. We haven't seen the advertised December date yet. Obviously, that's the one we're going to target. But we'll be bringing a GMP to you in the end of November, beginning of December, to try and get approved for the total project cost, which will envelop the 1.184 that you approved for the Phase 1 pre-construction money in that number for a total project cost.
Mr. Teuber.
I just want to say that we did a whole lot of additions and renovations back in 2000, 2007, 2008. None of them have been the thought and the innovation that is done on this particular one is just off the charts. If this doesn't become a model for the state as far as what you've done to add to the existing facilities, to do the new one with the JROTC building with the expandable rooms, it is real. And the collaborative agreement with working with the staff that's currently on that school. I mean, this really, if we talk about documentation, is something that really needs to get brought out and made as a success story, because all from the start to finish. Because this really is expansion done right, and this is really a neat project, and you guys are doing a great job with this one. This one really has to, the public has to see the amount of skill and effort both our contracting parties have done, our school-based people, and your team working collaboratively. This is really a great project.
Thank you.
And just because you did those renovations inside the building, you actually created more classroom space than if they had just been in the new building. So thank you for thinking holistically of what we can do to problem solve. And thank you to the school for helping you along the way. And our architects, I guess.
It's everyone. We've had a great project team between the school-based staff, the principal, the design team, and our own internal staff. It's been a great project, and I'm appreciative of everybody's input.
Mr. Moore, before you exit, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to respond. There's been some folks that brought up the issue of East project and the South project and the sequencing of those two, and I'd ask you to provide some information, and I think he's provided a pretty compelling case. It's important, he points out, go back to the time when that decision was made, and even currently, I think it's very justified, the sequence of events here. But if you don't mind sharing with the board some of that information, and if you need your memorandum of me, I do have it available to you.
Yeah, I didn't bring that particular one with me, but I'll try to recall some of the facts. One of the things that we discussed is looking at our current population, looking at our current enrollment, is really not the context you want to look at how the decision was made. The decision to build in the South Zone was made in 2014, as many of the board members who sit here now know that. So we used the data and the information and the need that we understood at that time to make that decision. And if you look at the data, we all knew, and we presented here, I believe I did a presentation here back in 2014, sharing data from the state showing our enrollment. Every South Zone high school, with the exception of Cypress Lake High School, was over capacity. Estero High School was at 108% utilization rate back then. And S3 was where we had a majority of the students, since we only had one school in S3, which happens to be Estero High School, had a capacity of only 1,600. We had 1,300 students living in Bonita Springs at that time, and a growing majority of them were being bused to South Fort Myers High because it had a little bit more capacity than Estero, even though it was over capacity. So that was one of the things that we were looking at. We also looked at our forecasting model, and our forecasting model told us at that particular time, with the data that we had, that the South Zone was growing faster than the East Zone, and that's a fact. Also, if you look at the fact that the year before we made the decision to build in Bonita, we had just opened up an addition at Dunbar High School, which is an East Zone school, that added close to 800 student stations in the East Zone. So at that particular time, in the context the decision was made at, we had covered the East Zone capacity needs from what we had available for projections in data well into the time when we were opening up Bonita Springs High School. So again, the informed decision that we made was based on data, and data that was commonly available to everyone, but also looking at our enrollment rates, our utilization rates. Busing was also an implication. We had to look at the economy of busing as well. So that's the context in which we made those decisions. And also, if you even look at U.S. Census data, which is part of our model now, U.S. Census data, even at that time, showed that Bonita Springs was growing at a greater rate than Lehigh Acres. So all the indicators at the time made it a very simple decision. This is where we need to build that school. And I think one of the things that we had the ability and agility to do was reduce the student station count when our refined model started to show us that the growth wasn't as great. You know, projection models are not crystal balls. You can't predict. I mean, we have a lot of variables right now in our area with the algae, with a lot of different things that could change how our enrollment growth looks over the next couple of years. And that's not going to bear out in any model that you develop. It's our role as a staff to monitor those and make good informed decisions, provide that information to Dr. Atkins, who in turn provides it to the board to make that decision. But I think it's really important to go back to 2014 when that decision was made and look at the facts at that particular time that the decision was based upon.
If you look at our current data, you know, where we are right now today, there's still very compelling data that should demonstrates a definite need for seats in the South Zone and a definite need for seats in the East Zone. And, you know, and I think that, you know, when you look at the data, I think it really supports the decisions that were made. The other things that are more disturbing is some assertions that people make about the school district made this decision because of the desires of the gated community, you know, down in the Bonita area. And, you know, I think that what I point out to folks is if you look at socioeconomics, if you look at minority-majority populations, the East Zone data and the South Zone, particularly S3 down there, are very, very, very similar. Recently, I know Don Huff shared some data that we've shared with board members that, you know, that demonstrates just that. You know, so, you know, these are just things that I think people Monday morning quarterback, but if you go back and really look at, you know, what the data says and look at the rationale for the decision that was made, you'll see that, you know, I think it was a good decision that was made. And I want to credit Mark he really worked with his team when he was down in student, planning growth and capacity, and brought forth a better model in terms of making predictions, a model that is really, I think, state-of-the-art, working with Dr. Van Buskirk, and who's really somebody who's well-known in the industry. And so I think the algorithm that we use now is superior to the state algorithm. And so, I think this is an example where the district and Mark and the facilities department literally put us at the cutting edge of the industry in terms of school construction, and so I want to commend him for that publicly.
Thank you, Dr. Atkins.
Yeah, can I say that sometimes I think when I go out and I do these presentations, I think people picture staff closing their eyes and throwing a dart, saying, oh, that's where the school should go. And when we explain to them the processes that you guys engage in, and I express to them my confidence in your abilities and the processes that you're now engaging in, I think it helps the public to understand. I guess my only request for you is please don't get discouraged when the public doesn't understand what you're doing, because what you're doing is very complicated, and you can't expect the public to fully understand it. But I certainly support you, and I have confidence in your work, so thank you.
Appreciate that.
I think that is shared by all of us. We really do. And it's true. You only can work with the facts you have at hand, not with what's going to happen 10 years later or 4 years later. So, thank you for all that you do. Ms. Morgan.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask that you give us the bullets on the difference in the costs for the two schools that you gave in the beginning, because I think that would help all of us, if I missed it. Yeah.
It would be nice to have that handy.
Yes, ma'am. I believe Dr. Atkins has those, and we'll make sure that he forwards them to board members.
Yeah, I can do that and forward them to you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right. Next, we have district best practices on school security with Mr. Parfit and Mr. Deming.
Okay, I'm glad to be here, and I want to thank you for having us. And we're going to do a quick update on school security and best practices. Mr. Parf has been doing a lot of training on threat assessment and all the different hardening tactics we use in our district, and he's going to go over with you those right now.
Good afternoon, members of the board, Superintendent Atkins and Mr. Dodig. The Department of Safety and Security recognizes the importance of providing a safe, secure, and healthy environment for all district students, staff, and visitors, and to ensure that the school district is prepared to effectively respond to all emergencies that we might encounter. We do this by constant review of safety and security practices of the school district. This afternoon, I'd like to present some of the findings of recent assessments and make some recommendations to identify strategies and activities that the school district could implement to improve school safety and security. The district has a history of leading by use of best practices in safety and security, whether that be in the use of new or improved technologies, hardware, building design, training, or other areas. But unfortunately, many times best practices come to be defined after a tragedy. The murder of students and staff at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland is a recent event that challenges everyone to reevaluate how our students and schools are protected. Many ideas, though sincere and well-intentioned, are not always practical, legal, or the best methods available. Our goal is to have our public safety partner agencies and others related to education add to the best practices in their specific domains. We work closely with state, local, and federal agencies to ensure that our school district meets regulatory requirements and utilizes preventive safety measures. Especially with our zone security managers, we'll continue improving our school security risk assessments annually so that we're able to derive timely and useful information about safety and security concerns at individual schools so that deficiencies can be corrected expeditiously and improvements made to other areas. This assessment was a comprehensive assessment of how effectively the district compares to best practices related to health and safety, discipline and conduct, facilities and equipment, safety programs and training, and of course, the school climate and community outreach. We are meeting and many times exceeding best practices related to the safety and security of our students, employees and visitors, buildings and programs. We will continue many currently used and accepted strategies for safety and security. Others will be modified and some will be new changes. Some of the strategies and actions taken and recommendations include, and you've heard these several times, threat assessment teams in every school, and the training of those teams is actually occurring right now. The mental health awareness training, another critical component of protecting children, is the trainers have been trained. The school district has been waiting for the funding to be appropriated, and it has, and that training will be occurring soon. Changes in the services. We must provide students related to emotional and mental health referrals. These programs and services are being expanded in line with statutory requirements. Each school has a safe school officer, and we have met that by employing school resource officers from Lee County Sheriff's Office and the police departments of Fort Myers, Cape Coral, and Sanibel. We will continue to evaluate alternatives as provided in the statute. Emergency drill procedures have changed. We have modified those practices now, and this will also continue. Training for active shooters is offered on our online training platform, and our law enforcement partners are tailoring their training programs to our particular needs. We're continuing to add video access controlled entrances to all of our schools, and this will be complete by the end of the school year. This is part of our single point of entry design, and we have a few schools remaining to add fencing and gates. Classroom security function locks, also known as code red locks, will continue to be added to classrooms without them. Closed circuit TV cameras will continue to be added. The Fortify Florida mobile app, an app that was approved by legislation and is set to go live any day now, will allow students and others to report behavior anonymously. And the information will come to the district and will also come to local law enforcement provided through FDLE, mainly this service. We're looking at emergency notification systems, especially those that have redundancy with existing systems that we have, and that's working with the technology folks. As mentioned, our hurricane shelters, working with the Emergency Operations Center in the county on identifying new sites, new schools. You heard the new construction requirements, and we're also continuing with training in shelter managers and other related things with that. The Office of Safe Schools was created by this legislation, and I can imagine they're overwhelmed. They have a staff of about 4 people, and so we're still waiting for some of the information to come from them on best practices and recommended actions, but unfortunately we can't wait, and so a lot of these things we've actually moved on already. Some of the fiscal impacts and timelines. Most of the training costs related to our threat assessment teams and our mental health awareness trainer training were able to be added to existing grant funds, and hopefully this grant will fund some of that additional training in the future. We are currently training our school-based threat assessment teams right now. We've trained probably 30 teams, even today is a training, and we'll train up to probably 500 school personnel and school resource officers as part of these teams. Most of these personnel will be trained on duty days at no additional expense. Our student counseling services and psychological and social work services will be administering our mental health plans and mental health assistance allocations, which include the mental health awareness training. Training 5,500 teachers plus staff will be occurring soon, and we hope to train as many people possible on professional development days. The district must continue to attract school psychologists, social workers, and school counselors, as these positions are a critical part of our violence prevention. The state has allocated some additional sums to assist in the mental health evaluations and community-based behavioral health and support services for at-risk students. Our district is coordinating with Salus Care and SEDNet in establishing these agreements, and Mr. Dodig is working with those folks right now. We have the possibility of some additional funding through a non-competitive grant that we're looking at directional antennas, if that's the best way I can describe it. Some of our buildings being so old and so secure, the radio reception in the buildings is impossible. So these antennas would add emergency responders' radios to work better in our schools than they do currently. Also, along with that grant, we're looking at the addition of the single point of entry gates and some of the code red or classroom security locks. Closed circuit TV cameras and access controlled doors will be added as funding is available. As security technology evolves, this must continue to be a permanent equipment budget item. We have built these equipment designs and technologies into our remodel and construction projects, but our challenges will be on retrofitting existing, many times old buildings with current technologies.
That's right.
I mentioned the Fortify Florida mobile app, and that will occur at no cost to the district. The hurricane shelters, as Mr. Reckenbacher explained, the cost for bringing our buildings up to hurricane standards will be borne by the county for that. Okay. And I just want to add, and I stress this a lot, that you know, I believe in all the technology, all the target hardening that we do of our schools. But at the end of the day, what's going to protect our kids is information. Exactly. And the information has to come from our threat assessment teams and our counselors, mental health, SROs, and things like that. And that's all I have, folks.
Diligent eye makes all the difference. Ms. Vischer, and then Ms. Patrica.
Thank you. So, Mr. Parfit, you said that to date we've trained 500 staff and SROs?
No. We intend to train up to 500 people. We've trained about 30 teams as of today, and there's about 4 or 5 people on a team.
Okay, so looking at our district and looking at the requirements that have been set forth by the state, what would be the timeline? How long will it take before we are compliant and have all of our people who need to be trained?
Well, the statute requires us to have a threat assessment team at each school, which we do have.
Okay.
We established that, and it doesn't provide. It does not provide anything for the training. That's where we've taken it upon ourselves as best practices to acquire the training and to start providing it.
And those best practices yet have not been released by the Office of Safe Schools.
They have some published or I guess published on their website, okay. But they have not issued any type of official directives, white papers, anything related to that.
Okay. So now when we're looking at our collaborations with community agencies, do you know how that's being monitored as far as the mental health awareness and the mental health referrals that are happening? You know,
I
how
know-
do we, are we getting reports about the outcome, and then are schools being informed about, you know, what the situation is with those students? You know, what is the status?
That's kind of a delicate area. The MOUs that they're working on will provide us the ability to set up referrals quickly with our partnering agencies. Our counselors, our social workers, and even from my office are trying to instruct folks to work with Salus Care and the families in obtaining release of information waivers from those providers, so they can at least talk to our counseling folks and social workers.
Great, great. So in addition to threat assessment teams, do we have something that's named a safety team at each school also? Or is that in essence the same?
We do.
We do.
We have a safety committee. District 1 and each school has one as well.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and with the active shooter training, what's the status on that? Like, how many schools have had that, and what has been the response? And my question particularly is in regard to elementary schools.
Rick, I hate to intervene. I mean, we could theoretically have a session about security that would not provide information that maybe the public should not have.
Absolutely.
And in the law are some confidentiality requirements. So I'm not sure where he's going to go with the answer, but I am concerned a little bit about information that is kept confidential and
I'll
exempt.
withdraw that question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Patrica.
I'm just wondering, and I don't think this is a question for you, Rick, as much as it is for Dr. Atkins, what we're doing to get out ahead of funding for SROs for next year. If Amendment 1 passes, that's going to mean less revenue for our municipalities and our county. And I know that, isn't Galvano going to be the leader of the House? Isn't he going to be?
Senator.
The Senate. He's already signaled that he wants to see revenue put, or he wants to see money stay in the Guardian program. He was not willing to move that money from, right, am I right?
Yes, that's correct.
So I have concerns about that financial picture for next year. What are we doing, if anything? And to our chair, at what point are we going to finish our legislative platform? Because I think this should be something that is included.
I agree.
All right, first of all, what I had already asked Mr. Parfit and Mr. Deming to do is to continue to study the different models across the state, to include any hybrid system, which they have done and continue to report back to me on the status of those. The reason is because, you know, I also anticipate that funding potentially can be an issue. Secondly, I think that is something that we, as we talk to Carol Green, we indicate that we would like to have it, the current funding level continue, at least at the current level. And also we are working with our partners, and you know, one of the things that I am trying to make real clear if I'm talking to a person on city council from either Fort Myers or Cape Coral is that when I go around to these buildings and make the rounds, you know, I usually make a good attempt to introduce myself to the SRO and also talk to the principal about how things are going, and I'm very happy to report. At this point, I think I've probably got about 40 plus schools under my belt in terms of what I've visited this year. That is not just a, you know, visit like we did at Allen Park, but you know, where I go visit and walk around. Those visits I check in to see how is it going with the SRO, and I can report to you both in the city of Fort Myers and also in the city of Cape Coral. The principals are overwhelming in how supportive they feel, how supported they feel by those SROs. So that is something that then we can take back and share with our representatives moving forward. That I mean, I get to see things like SROs out on playgrounds interacting with kids. SROs out in hallways, positively interacting with kids. I think it's also was very compelling, not that this necessarily is directly linked to the SROs, but I think it's directly linked to what our police chiefs are trying to do in terms of making this community safer. But if you heard Chief Diggs at the NAACP banquet, his data on the reduction of the murder rate and the violence in Fort Myers is extremely compelling, and that is about, I believe, building relationships. And Chief Diggs, as soon as he arrived upon the scene, made a real effort to get with us as a school district and get into our schools so he could build those relationships. And then quickly, Cape Coral followed up and overwhelmingly supported us in putting SROs in those schools, really for the same reason. So these are all things that proactively that we are working to do to get, I think, ahead of this in two ways. One is to make it known how supportive we are of our current model and our SROs and what our municipalities have done for our district and what our SROs are doing for our schools and our kids. But secondly, I feel we have to have an alternative plan if we have reduction funding, and that is where Mr. Parfit and his team have already reported back a couple different times to me on what's out there, and then they will continue to do that in anticipation that that there's a real push for a hybrid model. And then lastly, I'll say that I know that Senator Benaquisto had made that known to us as well, that she felt that's at least something that we ought to be doing and I didn't think that was a bad idea. I think that our model is the best, but it requires significant funding, and correct me if I'm wrong, right now it's approximately $8 to $9 million total between the sharing that takes place. Okay, so yes, it's quite an investment, but I think it's worth it when you're talking about security of kids.
Any other comments or questions?
Ms.
Morgan. Vanelli?
No, Ms. Morgan.
Oh, Ms. Morgan.
Doesn't matter. Go ahead, Lisa.
My question is, when will, if we've only had 30 teams, when will the rest, all the schools be up to speed then?
I think we're not. If we're talk about that, we should do it.
That was the same question.
It is? Okay.
And I think I can share that with you confidentially. I think my concern is, you're welcome.
Never mind. Sorry.
It's okay.
I think the goal is he's on it. Yes, Ms. Morgan.
What about guest teachers? They go from school to school. The situation in each school is different. How do they know what's supposed to happen in a school when they walk in?
Good question.
I think Dr. Pruitt can help us with that question since she's responsible for guest teachers.
She has the next presentation.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Good idea. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. I had a hard time jotting everything down. Is it possible to get a white paper with like key bullet points?
Yes.
Absolutely.
That would be wonderful. Thank you very much.
And I do want to, as they're leaving the stage, I think that he did indicate, this Office of School Safety is overwhelmed. They have not provided a lot of information to schools, but these gentlemen have both been very proactive. They've been attending training, not only in this state, but nationally, bringing back best practices and putting them right into application here in our school district. I think you heard what he said, that this is not something that came out of the state office, but the training, but that was something that they proactively did. And there's a lot of things that we're finding that they're pretty much, schools right now, our districts are left to do things themselves. They've been very proactive in their approach, which, again, I appreciate.
Mr. Parfit was correct when he said, they only have 4 or 5 people doing this, and so they're having a rough time too. As is indicated, Fortify is supposed to have started Monday live. Did not. Mr. Parfit just got his log-on credentials today.
Wow.
So
They are getting a hurricane in Tallahassee, so
That's
maybe
true.
that has something to do with it.
This was before the hurricane.
Okay.
They were supposed to start Monday before the hurricane. But anyway, so they're working hard. It's a work in progress, and luckily we're ahead of where most people are.
And that's why key hires are so critical, because the bottom line is we have to be able to count on our staff and not other people. And I think hiring Mr. Parfit has shown us that, we're doing the right thing when it comes to local hires and
Yeah, I would agree.
service.
And thank
Thank
you
you.
to both you and Mr. Deming for going to the conference and adding to your information and knowledge this summer so that you were better prepared to serve us. We really appreciate that.
Get a look at this.
Dr. Pruitt?
Jammed on this count. Change orders.
Next, we'll have Dr. Pruitt coming up and discussing guest teachers and how they are trained, along with the instructional calendar.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
So in reference to the guest teachers, without getting into a lot of detail about it, which I'm happy to share with you individually, we've incorporated some information in the orientation that we do for all of our new hires. And then in addition to that, we have a district-wide handbook that has also general information in it, and then the schools are instructed to include the pertinent school-based information in each of those handbooks, so that they have the same information that the teachers would have relative to that. So in other words, the general stuff is covered either in the orientation and in the handbook, and then it's whatever is individualized. The school is responsible for providing that information to the guest teachers. I will say that just as you heard, we're in that transition phase, so I can't confidently say that it's comprehensively done, in place yet, but that is the plan and the process currently.
Ms. Morgan?
Yeah, I'm not an advocate of micromanagement, but I think the first time around, some oversight is warranted. So who's providing the oversight of the individual school plans, at least initially, to make certain that it's...
In terms of the handbook piece, or in terms of the school safety plan?
In terms of what they get when they walk into each individual school, leaving it up to each school means that a guest teacher may see some more comprehensive, some less comprehensive than others.
Correct.
So is there an expectation in terms of the quality and quantity of information the guest teachers are going to get at each school, and who's going to, at least initially, provide oversight to make certain that?
No, there was not, but I'm happy to do that.
Well, just a suggestion, you could get with Mr. Parfit. They've got their teams that check safety protocols. They've got one per zone that does that, so that could be, if it's not already a part of their checklist of things to check, that's something that we can certainly add pretty easily.
I can work with them then to make sure. Sure.
Thanks.
Great. Any other questions on that? All right, I am here to talk to you about the recommendation from the Instructional Calendar Committee. That is a committee that is, it's sort of governed by the Talc and Spout contract as a contract committee. The committee is made up of Talc members, Spout members. Mr. Toiber was our board representative this year. Community members, parents, teachers, school administrators, district administrators, so we sort of have everybody at the table. I'm going to highlight for you some of the changes that you may notice for the recommended FY20 calendar. The earliest start date for students statutorily that we could do was the 12th of August, so that is the recommendation. The week before school, you will notice there's a change here because we have agreed to some tentative language in bargaining, and that we are changing the preschool week. We're no longer going to have duty days on preschool week. What we're going to have is preschool days, and that allows the schools the flexibility that they may have some in-service for 2 hours and then classroom time. And what we've agreed to is that schools will guarantee that the teachers will have a minimum of 12 hours in their classroom to prepare, and then the schools can work their schedule around that time. And then there's a district in-service day for elementary and a district in-service day for secondary. And so both management and the unions were excited about that change because it gives both sides some flexibility. The other thing that you're going to notice is taking off the entire week for Thanksgiving. We looked at some data that looked at student absences on Monday and Tuesday that were pretty compelling. And so that was the recommendation from the committee, is to have that entire week off. The other thing is we had one of the committee members who literally looked at every school calendar in the state, and that is a pretty common practice, is to have that Thanksgiving, that entire Thanksgiving week off. One of the things that we always felt hamstringed is we were under the impression that we had to have 90 days in that first semester, and we found out that's not the case, that as long as we meet the minute requirements for the semester classes, then we are able to split that up. And as what the statute says is you have to have 180 total days, but you do not have to split it up 90 and 90. So that allows us to meet that need of getting those semester courses done before the winter break, but still be able to have that, that time off at Thanksgiving. You will notice that there is one hurricane makeup day in semester 1, and that is something that we have done several times in the past. Primarily the thinking behind that is that generally if it's a minor event that we're not sure if it's going to hit us, it's usually a day. But if it's an Irma situation, or God forbid a Michael like those folks are going to experience, then it's going to be more than even 4 days probably. And so that's why those additional days were put at the end of the year, because if you put them anywhere else in the calendar, then it delays the end of the school year, and folks were not real supportive of that idea. So the other change you might notice is that the in-service day in February, we moved that up. The teachers were interested in having a day where they could really go to work on some skills and things that students might need prior to entering into the testing season, which has been so comprehensive, and so that day is a little bit of a change. So those are the primary things that we're looking at. Again, this is just the instructional calendar for FY20 recommendation, and then I would ask if Mr. Teuber has anything that he would like to add as the board representative.
Yes, thank you. You know, one of the things that you know if you've been on the committee, and I think all of us have at least one time or another, and it's been a while since I've been on it, but some years you get lucky and some years you don't. And this year was a very fortunate year in how the days fell, the holidays fell, that I think this calendar is very conducive to education. And so, you know, we finished before, in one semester, the days off are continuous weeks that really facilitate the community and the parents and for students, as for learning. The second half on the in-service day, we had some conversations in the past, and we had school-based people even make the comment. Typically, it would have been on the 14th of February, and people just take a 4-day weekend and just take that day off. And I said, this board doesn't want to do that. And I said, I speak for the board, and I'm hoping I'm not speaking out of turn, but I said, to us, in-service days are important. We want to deliver. We feel that education is important for our teachers. We feel the resources are important, and we want to make a big deal for it. I mean, so we moved it for the reason that this board truly wants that in-service to be meaningful, and want everybody to have that day, our attendance to be the highest, because that day is really, you know, and the reason we did it on a Friday, you know, they work a full 4 days. You know, people still might take that day off, but I don't think so if they understand, you know, this is a Friday, you know, on a Friday, you got a weekend coming, but, you know, we want you there because it's important for us to give you that training and that's our commitment to you, and that's the reason why I moved it, and we had unanimous support from our group, and well, at least everybody bought in. It was, but so anyway, so that I spoke for the board, and I hope I didn't speak out of turn, but everything else was just a great collaborative effort across the board, and it was really an honor to see how well everybody was working and came up with really neat ideas. So.
I have one question. Ms. Morgan, you go ahead first.
I'm not sure whether this is a policy or not, but we have 2 holidays in here for 2 Jewish holidays. And I got a question from a Muslim individual who wanted to know about providing for other holidays. So I guess my question is, as we move forward as a district, do we need to think about having excused absences for religious holidays? And what is the rationale for having Jewish holidays but not other holidays? I mean, it seems to me that...
I could speak to the attendance issue. Religious basis is an unexcused absence in Florida and in this district per our policy. So that is an unexcused basis to be absent. So that covers that. Relative to the other issue, Dr. Atkins was in charge of this committee for a long time too. Certain groups have come to the calendar committee in the past, and I think sort of lobbied for certain days off, veterans and others. I'll leave it there, and how that process works from there. I have never been on the committee, but I know that has taken place in the past. So, but there's no requirement for certain religious holidays to be off.
Did you say they're excused or unexcused?
Unexcused.
They're excused absences. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, well then that makes more sense.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, they're excused absences for religious basis. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, there for a second I thought I was.
Oh, goodness.
Something new.
And have your client correct you, but that's okay.
I can speak a little bit to the history of it, and then I'm sure Dr. Pruitt, she's done an awesome job over the last several years now, actually chairing that committee and setting records every year in terms of, I think this is, I don't want to misspeak, but maybe a new record for the calendar committee, or at least tying one of her previous existing records. Anyway, yes, we did have a couple groups that came forward and worked very closely with the calendar committee. Herb Fried represented the Jewish Federation, I believe, is the name of the group he represents, but he was a long-serving member on that committee, and he's the one that kind of brokered the one holiday out of two compromise that has been kind of a district standard practice over the last few years. And then when I first started on the committee, we had really some difficult discussions regarding Veterans Day. I mean, these were very, very difficult, challenging discussions where we literally had veterans that were fighting that was becoming pretty clear to us among the different veterans groups, but that resulted in a really good compromise, I think. There was a group that wanted to have Veterans Day ceremonies in school during a school day, and then there was others that wanted to give veterans the day off, and the compromise there was that we would have Veterans Day off, but then we had Pride and Patriotism, which is something that has been a real institution in this school district that Dr. Skrika helped institute a number of years ago. So that is where we are with Veterans Day. Has not really had any other groups that have come forward to that committee when I was on there that I can recall that asked for a certain day. And when we looked at other communities across the district or state back then, it had to do with composition among their different populations in terms of their demographics as a community.
That's what I was going to say. And looking at the other 67 or 66 calendars, that is kind of where that comes from.
No, I just want to make certain that we can tell parents that, they have a right. That's exactly really what I'm about.
Excused absence.
Thank you. And also, it is, I will second Mr. Twyber, what a clean calendar. I couldn't believe it when I opened it up and looked at it. What a clean calendar. It looks terrific.
They're clean.
Great calendar. Thank you.
Excellent job. Kudos to the team.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, thank you so much.
All right, and next we have public comment. Mr. Dodig, do you have any cards for public comment?
I do not.
Okay, then I'm going to ask those on my right, your left. Is there anyone who has a comment regarding today's agenda? To my left, your right. So we have no public comment. So moving right along, let's go to board member comments. Ms. Fisher.
Okay, thank you, and I'll be brief. Mrs. Morgan, welcome back. Anxious to hear about your adventure. Saturday, finally, we had the Drug-Free Coalition Prevention Run, and it was very successful. There were about 400 participants, and they earned $50,000 for the continuation of Drug House Odyssey to our fifth graders, along with some other in-school presentations for our other grade levels. I had the opportunity to go to Allen Park the other day for the radio contact with the International Space Station. It was amazing. What a great experience. And so Courtney Black, the fifth grade teacher who facilitated the whole thing, said, "It is my hope that programs like this will foster a love for learning in students and teachers alike and inspire the next generation of scientists, technicians, engineers, and mathematicians." So that was absolutely wonderful, and I hope it gets replicated around the district. And it was also a very excellent demonstration of partnerships with other agencies in the community. I have been invited to participate in a panel discussion on the 19th of October, and it is with the Hazelton Betty Ford organization, who do a lot of work with our school district, and it's intended to help with strategies to end addiction and support recovery. And we know that we hardly have a family who's not impacted these days by that. So I'm honored to be part of that, and I want to thank our today I was at the Cape Coral Chamber for the Principals Luncheon. So we're very proud of all of our principals, but today our principals in Cape Coral got to be recognized, and it was a very well-attended event. And that's all I have right now.
Okay. Ms. Giovanelli.
Just real quick, I too attended the Allen Park, and I brought my granddaughter in. It was awesome, and she really liked it, except that she thought it should be videoed. So I had a really hard time explaining that it was the CB radio, and the concept of that was not easy for a 4-year-old. But it was we did enjoy it. So, and then I actually got the presentation from Soretta Ralph regarding the kindergarten, and I actually have already shared that with my daughter, so she will get registered or pre-registered for kindergarten. And I think this was a great idea, and she presented this to EDAC the other night, Monday, and I think it's going to really get out ahead of the crowd, I should say. That's all. Thank you.
Did anyone here in staff go to the NAACP banquet?
Yes.
So, how impressed were you by their compliments of the superintendent? I mean, I have before told Dr. Atkins, and I've said publicly that I believe you have the ability to change education in the state of Florida, certainly in Lee County. You're moving our students forward, and you will make huge changes here, but I believe you can change it in the state of Florida. I think that that was some pretty independent verification of what I've been saying to you all along, what I've been saying to the public all along. So I know you're going to deflect and say it's all about the team and all that, but I'd like you to just take a minute to enjoy being recognized for the work that you're doing for this community. And there was one other thing I wanted to say, and I can't remember what it was. I'll interrupt Steve.
You can come back, yeah.
Thank you. I just have one. If you notice, board members, I pulled a comment on a request from some of the board on some issues that we had that seemed a little bit comprehensive. And Dr. Atkins actually answered, my question to bring it up as far as the 2-hour time limit. Since then, we've had several other requests from other board, from board members, and I wasn't trying to call out any board because it was important information. I'm glad everybody read it and it was shared, and I like how we share it. As I'm rolling off the board, I just want to continue to compliment this board, the protocols, and what we've done and accomplished over the time since 2014 to now has been phenomenal. And I think that the organization, the efficiency of the team, and I credit a lot to Ms. Morgan, but the entire board of how we crafted it together and worked at it together and continue to tweak it. As I roll off, I encourage you to continue to work with the new board members as they come on to show them and encourage them to continue to do what is working, because, we can continue on moving forward with new members of the team and new cogs in the puzzle, but I think a lot of it is because of the structure and the processes that we worked really hard to put in place. So I just wanted to emphasize that and commend this board and just say that don't lose sight of that as we cycle through. So that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I second that too. I think the momentum that we have right now, they have to feel, and that is part of an orientation process, and even down to the details of what each of our workshops are all about, why we have them, why briefings, and the difference. And as I've said all along, making sure that people understand that by the time something gets to the action meeting, it has been discussed and vetted and compromised. And so the action night is not the major part of interest to our community. The major part is all the things that lead into that final action. That final action has been decided before it gets to the action meeting. And so I think that's really very, very critical for new people, because it's tough to overcome when you're perceived as a rubber stamp board, and people have to understand that that night is not the vetting process night. Exactly right. It's the night to approve all the work that's been done up to that night. And so I think that's very important too. Couple things. Steve, when I heard all the reports from the advisory committee, it took me back to when you and Eleanor came on the board. And that's where our advisory committees were born. And at the time that we formed them, we had no clue exactly whether they would be viable or not. And at the time, the board was split on, should we do these or shouldn't we do these? And that's one more thing on our agenda. Well, as time has passed, it has proven itself. And I want to acknowledge Eleanor Sirica, Dr. Eleanor Sirica, because she fought and fought and fought for these advisory committees and to keep them viable. And there were times when they could have fallen apart because many of them during the time didn't feel that they felt like they were just talking about things and nothing was happening. And now, over the years, they have credibility, they have decision-making opportunities or recommendation-making opportunities, and we have attracted more and more of the specialists from those areas. When I heard the credentials for the people in the Financial Advisory Committee, wonderful. It's really exciting, and it's exciting to have more of our committee members, community members. And so I don't know how much you keep in touch with Eleanor, but I'll try to get that word to her. She would be very proud. She'd be smiling today, too. And then I attended the culinary taco cook-off.
Oh, we couldn't make it, so yeah.
How was it? It was a lot of fun. I ate a lot of guacamole. And actually, the food was outstanding. We sat with Nick Betos, and what a nice man. And he's very supportive of our school district, as especially, Chris, because you've had
spent a lot of time together.
Anyway, he had a big family group there, and it was packed, and everybody was having a good time. I didn't stay long enough to find out who won. Oh. We each got a card to put in the box of one of the schools in terms of which one we thought was best, but it was hard to pick. So that's my report.
I'll just check with Ms. Davis about that.
Two things. First of all, thank you all for agreeing last November to extend the board meeting from yesterday to today, because I had a travel day yesterday, and I'm glad to be back. Thank you. And I'm going to ask Steve and Jane, based on Steve's comments, that even though you go off the board, you can play a critical role as mentors to new board members, and you will be.
And we can talk to them.
Yes, you can.
That's right.
You can.
And they can talk to you.
Yeah, you both will be great assets to the board going forward in that role. So thank you. Those are my comments.
I remembered my thing. First, I have to call you out, liar, liar. You're not really happy to be back, are you? Student advisory was the other thing I wanted to talk about. There was a student who sat right there. Like, the students were giving recommendations about things they wanted to talk about, like food and dress code and, carpeting or whatever it was that they were talking about. And one student said, well, I think we need to limit the topics that we discuss so that we make sure that they're within the realm of governance by the school board. And I was like, what? That's one of our students. Just the whole room was filled with kids who were excited to be there and happy to serve, and it just was a reminder, despite the political yuck that we're dealing with right now, it was a reminder of why we do this. So that's right. That was good.
It's interesting because Dr. Kunkel, both you and Mr. Toiber's name came up the other day when I was chatting with Denise about the reorganization process, and I both said that both of you should be available to sit down with the new board members to go through the protocol manual.
Well, now we're consultants, aren't we?
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Unpaid consultants.
Unpaid. And let's see, I too am impressed with what we're seeing. I was at Allen Park and thrilled to see the energy, and I want to tell people our ham radio operators are extremely critical, not just when we want to speak with someone in space, but they are critical during our emergency operations component. And very few people are participating in that practice these days, and it's extremely critical because we need to be able to use items for communication to get the word out that is not dependent on electricity or internet. And so I just really appreciate those people, and I hope that tradition continues, and some of our students will be inspired to take that on as a hobby and be a productive part of our community that way. And I too want to kudos to the Student Advisory Committee. We also had someone, he was saying they're not supposed to do that, and I looked at him, I said, you're supposed to say point of order. And so he goes, and he was waiting for it to be quiet. I said, just yell it out. And they were wanting to follow protocol, and Jesus was so adorable when he said, please, can we have a presentation on the sales tax the next meeting? And it's right, the next day is the general election day, and I said, okay, we'll do that, but just ask your parents to hold off their vote to general election day so you can come back and discuss it with them. But the engagement level that we're seeing happen with these students is far above what occurred in 2015, that January of 2015. We are above and beyond where we used to be, and I have to tell you, it's been an amazing component to watch and see all of the exciting and wonderful things going on. And outside of having wonderful conversations with community members that want to have an impact on our students' lives, for those of you who are watching this briefing meeting, I asked you to contact the Foundation for Lee County Public Schools to find out information how you can mentor our students through either STAMP or the Take Stock in Children mentoring. I have my mentee who is now a junior, and I said, okay, I'm going to meet you Tuesday night at Lehigh Senior High. Parents, be watching and pay attention to those dates for those financial aid, because we're going to go to financial aid night and meet the parent, and I'm going to meet the parents for the first time, and we're going to talk about that process, because the next year I will be doing my best to help work her through that process so she's ready and has the plan. It is exciting to take on those students, so I encourage all of you out there to get involved and realize how important these are. Kudos to all of our administrators. A privilege to be able to sit down and talk with an administrator and spend 2 hours, it was at the end of the day, but 2 hours, talking about development of learning and what to do and how important it is for somebody to be able to teach a standard and not have a textbook, not have a TE, but be able to teach those standards and know how to take it and go with it and grade it and make it, integrate it, make it meaningful to their children's lives. So I just really appreciate the powerful instructional tools we have in our district, and our powerful instructional leader, Dr. Atkins, and all of you out there. You're amazing. Thank you for all you do for us. Dr. Atkins.
First, I just want to comment on the taco, whatever I got the official results here from Lauren. I guess Melissa Johnson on Rita Davis's team coordinated the effort. Oasis Charter won first place, but East Lee County High School won fan favorite.
The culinary arts program at East Lee is phenomenal.
And then just to follow up based on the comments of Ms. Patrica, I was very honored to be asked to speak as the keynote to the NAACP. It was something that, again, that was an honor to be asked, and then it was very humbling to hear the comments that were made. You know, it's certainly President Milwaukee expressing his feelings as it relates to the efforts of our school district and our team. For me, it was an easy thing to go into an agreement with the NAACP. We had been meeting with them on a regular basis, but what the steps that we have been taking are steps that are obviously in the best interest of children. And I really do believe that our school district should be a centerpiece of our community, and we have to provide the leadership for our community as it relates to education and education of our children. And hopefully I do want this school district to serve as a leader for this state and this nation, because I do believe that we have to do more as a nation for this nation's children. They are competing on a national level or an international level at this point, and in order to be globally competitive, we have to step up our game as educators. And a frustrated educator over the years who has not watched my profession move fast enough, I believe Lee County then should take the reins away from the other policymakers and show the rest of them how to be done. So that's what I'm committed to do. But we need partners like the NAACP, and I am extremely happy to have them on board because we are committed to the same goals. I came out of that and met with principals last week, and we talked about the agreement with the NAACP, and we've posted it online. We have asked our principals to go visit that and make sure that they're aware of everything that is in that agreement, because these are things that we're committed to doing. Extremely. And I spent a great deal of time, or significant portion of my time, talking about not only my appreciation for the work of the NAACP and what they've done to support this school district, but what we want to do working together with the NAACP and other community organizations to move education forward in this district and in this state and in this nation. So thank you for bringing that up. But it's one of those things that when somebody does that, you know, if you're like, all right, I gotta step it up and live up to this expectation, you know, you really feel that you really need to make sure you meet that commitment when somebody puts themselves out there and says those wonderful things. So I'm very appreciative. Thank you.
Mr. Dodig.
Well, I don't know if the attorney's supposed to go last, but I will.
Well, I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's not often.
Yeah, that's okay.
Just two things. I wanted to first thank Mr. Williams for filling in for my excused absence last week, or unexcused absence 2 weeks ago. And the second thing is, I know you all know that we have a pretty close-knit group of attorneys in this state. And I've heard from a couple of them from the Panhandle today and the Big Bend area, and they are going through a horrible situation. So I'm just saying publicly that we need to keep that in our thoughts as we sit here in our warm boardroom. We were there, but I think Dr. Atkins probably would be willing to offer any help we can provide the districts up there too after the conclusion of the storm. So that's all I have.
Mr. Dodig, it was excused, just don't do it again.
Believe me, I don't want to.
I have one real quick thing that I should have said as a good of the order. Our next meeting is on October the 23rd. That day, my husband and I will be at Camp Lejeune for the 35th memorial service of the bombing of the Marine barracks in Beirut, Lebanon. I wanted to ask if I talked with Mr. Dodig, and he felt like it was within the realm of our policy, but I would like to be able to participate, call in, and be there during the briefing time, and be able to call in for the action meeting that evening. I can break myself away from the dinner, and the afternoon is free. The service will be over, but before the next piece. But I just wanted to see if there's a consensus. How do people feel about that?
Yeah, go.
I guess my question is, by policy, she can't vote, though, correct?
Correct. The only way she could vote is if the board voted with a supermajority to allow her to bypass the policy. So depending on what the board's wishes are, I could certainly bring an agenda item that evening to vote on it, or she could certainly participate by phone but not vote. Yeah. That's the options here. Yeah.
But my question, with the new board docs, it allows her to be online and vote from, right?
That requires physical presence.
Okay. But I'm just curious, because the board docs allows that, though. I'm just...
Right. The ability to do it isn't the point. The point is state law.
Right. No. I understand.
I just...
That would be up to fellow board members to contact Ms. Johnson and Mr. Dodig to say what they feel about the voting process. I just wanted to explain to you, and also so the public understands the nature of why I won't be in attendance. Okay, thank you. And with that, we adjourn.
Thank you.